Okay, so this is literally the third time I'm recording this video, so I'm going to try and keep it quick. I wanted to start the video by saying thank you so much to the people who have reached out to me over the last 3.5 weeks. Your messages mean a lot, and I appreciate you checking in on how I am. I went from posting like 4 times a day to not posting at all. So I went through a life-changing experience, and if I'm honest, I don't want to share it. Most of me doesn't want to share it, but I feel led to, and I think that there's a reason why I should. I think that it's going to help many people, and especially people in the community that I've built who are dealing with unresolved issues and sickness. So 3 weeks ago, I went to an event, and I had multiple demons cast out of me. It was completely life-changing. It felt like the most foreign experience, but also like the most comfortable, if that makes sense, afterwards. So I'm just going to tell a little bit of my story, and I'm sure this is not going to be the last time that I speak about it. So many of you know that I grew up in South Africa. I think I made a post about this like 6 to 8 weeks ago, saying that growing up in South Africa, witchcraft was like everywhere, like it's integrated into the culture. So, for instance, we would have housekeepers who would find dead snakes in the backyard, and it'd just be normal for them to take it home to the Sangoma, which is the local medicine witch doctor. And they would use it to make muti, which is the medicine. I was always a really spiritual child. Like, I had visions and dreams, and I would have premonitions of future events. I saw spirits on multiple occasions, and I think so many of you can probably relate to that in some way. I remember getting to a point around probably like 15 where I was having so many of these spiritual visitations that I remember praying and asking God to close my eyes, to close my spiritual eyes, so I didn't have to see anything anymore, because it became too much. It was like overwhelming, and it was really traumatic. I wasn't taught how to actually deal with it, and I was never taught that I had authority over it either. So I moved to Australia when I was 15. I was invited to a youth group service where I had an amazing encounter with God for the first time in my life. 2 weeks prior, I prayed, and I remember saying to God, like, why am I here? What's my purpose? I was in so much pain, and I had suffered with depression for years. I was self-harming. I had been medicated since I was like 13 or something. The doctors told my parents that like depression ran in the family, so I think I suffered greatly because that was something that was spoken over my life, and there were other things like the holistic practices and methods that I teach my students now that I didn't have access to when I was younger. I believe my life could have been different if I did have access to those. That's why it's really important for me to share that, but that's not the point of this video. So yeah, the encounter with God at the youth group 2 weeks after I prayed that prayer was like some sort of confirmation to me that like it wasn't like this encounter that I had all the answers now. It was just a very small, quiet confirmation that there was something else out there that I hadn't discovered and I hadn't seen yet. And that led me on a journey to creating this community, this friend group, who were just beautiful men and women of God. And I spent the next couple of years with them, and we would go out in Northbridge. I was living in Perth at the time. We would go out in Northbridge at night and just pray for people. We would see healings, we would see people encouraged, and it was really beautiful. Like I felt like I had found my purpose, and that we were like really making a difference. I ended up joining a church, and I experienced a lot of rejection there. I wasn't living holy and the way that they taught us to live, the way that God teaches us to live. But I never understood the necessity for holiness. I started like going to raves and using drugs and all of that, what I thought was fun stuff. Everyone always told me like these things, sin, would open a door for the devil into your life. And I was always like, what does that mean? Like, no one ever sat me down and explained it to me, like, practically. That was always just a line, like, don't sin, it'll open a door. So eventually I was like, whatever, you guys, rebellion entered in. And essentially it was like, well, I'm going to go my way and I'm going to find out. And I do believe that I needed to. So I got wrapped up in a whole lot of crazy stuff. I ended up, I was pursuing my music career when I was about 20, and I was doing open mic nights and paid gigs in Perth. I would sell my album after my performances, and I ended up meeting a guy. It was one of those like series of events where you kind of convince yourself like this is meant to be. And a part of me believes that I was like greatly deceived looking back now, but part of me is really grateful for that experience. I spent 6 years with my ex, and although we were just in a whole life of like crime and it was just turmoil and chaos, but I believe that like God used it for good. I can see that now. Many lessons were learnt that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to learn any other way. I've kind of always been the type of personality who goes all in. If I feel that something is right, then I will pursue it with all my heart. Unfortunately, I pursued the wrong thing for a very long time, but that's how we learn. At the end of that 6-year relationship, I suspected at the time that I couldn't put the pieces together. Now I know for sure that my ex-partner became fully demonically possessed. I lived with him for about 3 weeks after he was possessed, and it was like living with a completely different person. I can go into that in another video in detail, but it was obviously very scary, and again, it was another spiritual experience where I didn't know what to do, and I felt so hopeless and fearful. I was never taught that I had like authority over the demonic realm. I think there's so many instances in my life that I would have played out or approached it differently if someone had seriously like discipled me and taught me that I had authority over the spiritual realm as a believer. So that's the part of my story where many of you came in. So I left my ex in Pemberton in WA, and I moved to my 1-bedroom flat in Scarborough. Many of you know that as the beginning of my story, where I moved into black mold and I started getting really, really sick. I'm not discounting black mold contributing to my illness and my symptoms. I am very much aware that there are physical aspects that play into the role of like our illnesses and our mental state. But now more than ever, I understand that there are spiritual aspects as well that we're not taught to address. And that's what this video is about. So I moved to Scarborough. I lived there for a few years, and I think I was so heartbroken because I had to leave the life that I had built for the past 6 years. Now I was all alone. I basically had to fend for myself. I had left the love of my life, and I think there was like a lot of trauma that needed to be worked through. I started practicing in a bid to regain some control. I started practicing witchcraft, and it was very, very deep, very fast. Like I said, I've always been spiritual, and I've always been like in tune with the spiritual realm. But I think the danger of witchcraft and the occult is that they're always waiting at the door. They're always waiting for that open door that I spoke of earlier. They're always waiting to get in, and they need that legal right to be able to access your life and to access you. And I gave them that. I started working with specific spirits. They would actually approach me first. I would have visions and dreams of specific goddesses, and I would essentially petition to work with them. And then we would start the line of communication. Probably sounds really out there to people who haven't had many spiritual experiences, but to those who have had spiritual experiences, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And especially to those who have been involved in witchcraft or the occult. Things just got bad, went from bad to worse. I was communicating with these spirits like every day, and my health declined, my mental state declined, to a point where like I couldn't take my rubbish out. I couldn't cook for myself. Like I was in so much pain in my body that I couldn't stand in the kitchen for 10 minutes and cook. I was ordering food, having like family members bring me food, and I was completely disabled. I was just in bed all day. And the only energy I had was to like go shopping like once a week or once every 2 weeks. And then I was like done. I was trying to, at the time I was running my virtual assistants business, which many of you on my Facebook profile will know. Yeah, so I can't remember how many years I lived there, but it got to the point where I could no longer take care of myself. I mean, I had a complete mental and physical breakdown. I hadn't brushed my hair in like weeks. And I had to shave my head when I moved from Perth. Like it was really bad. And I was so delusional in thinking like, if I just keep putting effort in and I keep trying, like things will get better. And obviously we have to try, we have to put the work in. But if you're putting effort into the wrong avenues, you're not going to get where you want to be. There's a formula for health and wealth. And I truly believe now more than ever, that formula is holiness, and it's being in tune with the living God. These other entities and these other ways, they just bring death and destruction, and I'm living proof of this. So my dad was living on the East Coast at this time, and he offered to buy my flight over to Queensland, and he took care of me for the next 4 years. I lived with him. He bought a property. And it was an amazing time in my life because I was still so sick, but I finally had someone who was speaking life into me. I had like never really had that before. My dad's very positive and he's very like all about mindset and stuff like that. And it was extremely empowering to learn what I learned from him over those 4 years. I believe that like seriously changed my life for the better. And I'm so grateful. At the end of the 4 years, I was still obviously very sick. When I moved over to Queensland, I stopped practicing witchcraft because I was like, I had met a mentor and they basically like invited me to be initiated like into the Satanic Church. And something didn't feel right about that to me, so I declined. But my journey with witchcraft and the occult got to the point where it was no longer just like me having conversations with spirits in my head. They would come into my apartment in the form of like snakes. I had 2 occasions where one occasion was a black python came into my bathroom, like in the vent above my shower, which was like, okay, like maybe that's just like normal or whatever. So I can kind of like shrug that off. And then a couple of weeks later it happened again. My window was open and a completely white snake came through the curtain and it literally just like looked at me. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning or something because I would be like awake all night because of the mold. And it came in and just like looked at me and then went out. And I was like, I was so fearful that like I didn't know what to do. So I was like, okay, just like pretend that didn't happen, right? There's other stories that I can tell, but I'm not going to go into that. I'm just letting you know if you're involved in the occult and you're involved in witchcraft. I don't care how good it looks. I don't care how much money you're making. I don't care how good you feel. It's not going to last. It's a culture of death. You're literally practicing death. So it's just a warning to get out now. Get out before you lose everything. So I moved to Queensland. I lived with my dad for 4 years. At the end of the 4 years, I'm in so much pain that I like pray to God again. And I'm like, God, thanks for getting me here, but like I don't think I can do this anymore because my pain had gotten to the point where, so for those of you who don't know, I had severe pelvic pain, previously diagnosed with endometriosis, and they inserted an IUD. And I spent the next 6 years going to multiple doctors on the West Coast in Perth and on the East Coast and looking for answers. And they would do pelvic ultrasounds, scans, and couldn't find anything, told me that the IUD was in place. I had been diagnosed with endometriosis and it had been removed, so they couldn't help me. And I'm not exaggerating, I went to hundreds of doctors, like GPs and specialists. And every time it was just this dead end, and I could never get anywhere. So I vowed not to go to another doctor. And then I prayed this prayer like, I'm going to end it because I can't deal with this pain anymore. I was having pelvic contractions, like lasting for like 2 to 3 minutes, 2 minutes apart for like almost all day, every day. I was in like extreme amounts of pain and I could barely walk. 2 weeks after I prayed that prayer, I was very involved in like the online endometriosis community, and someone had messaged me saying that there's a specialist in Toowoomba who specializes in endometriosis. Go and see them. So I received that recommendation And at first I was like, I'm not going to do it because I've seen all the specialists and like I'm not going to get anywhere. But I felt this prompting to go. So I said, I've got nothing else available to me right now. Let me go one more time and then I can make a decision from there. So I went, lovely doctor, and basically like they just agreed to do exploratory surgery. That might not seem like revolutionary or anything. You're probably sitting there like, oh, well, obviously they did. Like, you were in pain. They were going to investigate it. I had spent 6 years going to hundreds of doctors, begging for them to do investigative surgery, and each one of them declined me. GPs, gynecologists, specialists, pain specialists, like 6 years. And I go to this doctor and he's like, yeah, like, let's book you in. I think I was booked in probably like 6 to 8 weeks later after my initial appointment. So I was like, okay, like something's different here. Let me just go for it. So I went through the surgery, got out of surgery, and they had located my IUD, which had been found embedded in the wall of my uterus. So the contractions, the pelvic contractions I was experiencing was my body trying to get rid of this foreign object. But because it was embedded and stuck in the wall of my uterus, it wasn't able to get rid of it. So hence the pain. Obviously, that was an amazing outcome. And they also found like 2 egg-sized cysts like from my fallopian tube. So that would have been like twisting and causing a lot of pain as well. Then you guys, my Facebook community, would know that's when my 18-month journey started. So I got out of surgery and I moved into my tiny home, and I spent the next 18 months focusing on my diet. I lost a ton of weight because I taught myself to walk again, and I could walk every day now. Got off all the opioids that I had become super dependent on because all the doctors I had seen for the previous 6 years just gave me scripts for opioids and would never properly investigate anything. The first few weeks of moving into my tiny home, I had this experience. It sounds so crazy. Because I had been through so much with my health, I really wanted to focus, like I said, the next 18 months on just my health. So I would get up, exercise, and literally just like spend time with God and pray and make art all day. I knew that I really needed to find healing both spiritually, emotionally, and physically. So I ended up having this like crazy experience where I was praying one day in my kitchen, and I just felt like the presence of God so strongly, like this love and this like overwhelming peace. And I remember just being like flat on my face, just like bawling. And I saw this like a vision of Jesus step into my kitchen, and he was standing in front of me. And I basically like, I believe that this was my first experience of deliverance, but I didn't know at the time. It wasn't like I was vomiting, but like all this stuff started coming out my mouth onto the floor, which was like really gross. But I was so overwhelmed with like the presence of God and the peace that like I didn't really pay attention to it. But looking back now, I was like, oh, okay, like that's what happened. And I felt this like huge burden just lift off me, and I felt free. So around that time, my dad moved to Melbourne because obviously I was like, I can walk now and I'm living in my tiny home. So like I'm pretty much good to go. He moved to Melbourne for work, and I didn't have a community here. I didn't know anyone. So I started going to church. I visited a few churches, and I really felt led to go to this one. Started going there, and I built an amazing community. I was going to church on Sundays, and I started going to like a Bible study midweek. And for a few months, it was amazing. And I was like really learning a lot and building community, like connecting with people, which I hadn't done in so long. So it was like really life-changing for me. But it got to the point where I started getting like really sick whenever I'd go to church or to Bible study. And I didn't realize at the time, at the time I thought it was just anxiety, like social anxiety. But within like 6 months, it got to the point where like I would be sitting in church or sitting in Bible study for like 10 minutes, and I would feel this presence come over like from behind me, and I would start getting like black spots in my vision, and I couldn't breathe. It felt like I was being suffocated. So I kept on, you know how it is, right? Like I thought that I just had anxiety, and I had to like push past it, and it's all about mindset or whatever. I just needed to have a drink. Trying to push past it, and I just couldn't. It got so bad that like I used to dread going to Bible study and to church. I was like, I can't do this anymore, so I stopped going. And I basically like fell away from my whole community. I was like isolated again. And it's weird because I could win away this like, because when you say you feel impending doom, or you feel like a presence, a lot of people go straight to like, oh, it was just a panic attack. But remember, like I've been dealing with mental health issues since I was like very, very young. And I know what a panic attack feels like. It wasn't like it wasn't even similar in any way when you have like a experience with a spirit versus like a mental health thing episode. So I knew it wasn't a panic attack, and it was really interesting to me that when I stepped away from church and I stopped going, these episodes would stop. They would only ever happen if I was in church or in home group studying the Bible. So silly me, I don't put two and two together. I'm like still thinking it's probably anxiety, right? Which I look back now and that like sounds so stupid. I really like I guess I did put two and two together, but I wasn't educated enough to like come to the conclusion that that was actually possible. I always like double guess myself and second guess myself. When I was still going to church, I approached some of the people in my church and I was like, hey, I think there's a possibility that like something demonic's going on.